Welcome back to Logic Foundations. So in this tutorial, this is our second tutorial in our MySQL database course. So in this tutorial, we're going to go over how to actually create a database, how to create a table, and how to insert into that table. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to type in show databases so we can see. And I'm going to drop this Logic Foundation database altogether. So what we're going to type in is we're going to say drop database logic F. Okay. Now if we say show databases, you can see logic F is not there anymore. It was here, now it's gone. So I'm just going to clear the screen real quick. Okay. So we want to create a new database. So to create a database, we're just going to type in create database, and then we're going to give it its name. So let's just call this, we're going to call this logic F again. And we're going to hit enter. So now if we type in show databases, we can see logic F again. Now, like we learned in the first one, we're going to say use logic F. Okay, so database is changed. Now, if we say show tables, though, empty set. Well, that means there's nothing in there. Creating a table is a little different than creating a database, obviously, because we need to specify the data types and things like that in the table. So to start with, we're going to say create table. We need to tell it we're creating a table, and then we need to give it a name. Now we're going to call this user data, okay? Because this is going to house their first name, their last name, their username, and their password. So we're going to do some parentheses, and I usually do the ID or the primary key on this first line, and then skip down the next lines for each column that we add. So we need to have a primary key, and we need to have that auto increment, and it can't be null. This is going to be the ID that we use to gather information out of the tables or call that information out of the tables. So it can't be null. Every row has to have an ID to it. So that's what we're creating here. So we're going to say user ID. It's an integer, and we're going to say it can hold up to 11 places. It can't be null, so not null. And we need it to auto underscore increment. So now we hit a comma and hit enter, and we're going to jump down to the next line. So you can hit enter and jump down to the next line while you're doing this, as long as you don't put a semicolon. If it doesn't see a semicolon, it will jump down to the next line. So what's the next thing we're going to do? Well, this is going to be first name, and that's a varchar. And we're going to say 255, which is the highest amount that you can put in. That means you can have up to 255 characters for the name. So you should have no problem putting your name in there. We don't want this to be null either, so we're going to type in not null. And then we're going to do another comma, and we're going to go to the next line. We're going to say last name, varchar also, not null. Username, this is a varchar also. And a varchar is pretty much just a string in MySQL. It's just like a string in Java or anything like that. We're going to say not null. Password. Now, we're going to do this as a varchar for now. This is not a good practice if you're doing any kind of production work to use basically a string for the password, because that means it's not encrypted. Later on, we're going to go through how to actually put this in as an encrypted data using an encryption method or a hash method for the password itself. That's how you should always be storing passwords in databases. That way, if they're hacked, they can get their username and their names. They can't get their password. And even databases nowadays are encrypting the username, the password, the first name, and the last name to make it, just that much harder and more secure if somebody gets into it. Now, we want to assign user ID as the primary key. So we're going to say primary key, and then we're going to do parentheses, and we're going to say user ID, which is the name of our primary key column. We're going to do another parenthesis, and we're going to do a semicolon. So this is all we're going to put in. So basically it's telling it create a table, call it user data. These are the names of the columns that I want to give it. We're telling what kind of data it's going to be. Pretty much all strings except the ID is going to be a number or an integer. We're saying that none of them can be null, so don't allow them to be null, and auto increment the user ID and set user ID as the primary key. So we're going to hit enter. Okay, so query OK, 0 rows affected. What does that mean? Well, that means it created the table. If you get pretty much anything other than that, that means there's an error. So go back and check, make sure your commas are in the right places, and make sure your parentheses are actually around the right stuff. Make sure you double parenthesis the end because you opened one up here. So you definitely need a closing one here. So yeah, hope that worked. And let's go in and let's say show columns in, and what did we call this? We called it user data. Okay. So now you can see that the table is built out. Well, what do we want to put in here? Okay. Well, let's put some information in it because obviously you need information in a database. That's the whole point of one. So how do we go about that? So once again, I'm going to leave this up because this just makes it a little easier. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the insert into, and we're going to say user data. So we're telling it insert into this table. Now we're going to open up parentheses and we're going to tell it what columns we want to put this information into. Now since user ID is an auto incrementing column, we don't need to put anything in there. It's automatically going to do it for us. Okay. So the column that we need to do is first name, last name, and these have to be spelled exactly like you have them in here or it's going to error out. So username and password. Okay. So those are the 4 columns that we're going to put information into, and that's going to be the structure that we're going to put them in. So you're going to put in the first name, the last name, the username, and the password in that order. Now we're going to tell it the values that we want to put in there. So you type in values, and then I usually just jump down to the next line, and now I start putting in the values. Now the values, if they're strings, we need to put them in. Now we're going to put them in single quotes. Okay. First name, we're going to just type in mine, Travis. Last name, we're going to type in Harlow. Username, well, we're just going to type in Travis Harlow, the username. Oops. And then we're going to do, so between all of these, we need to put a comma to separate them. So we've got our column, our comma, and then our last one, we're going to just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the password. So we're going to close that, and we're going to end that. We don't actually have to end that. We can close that, hit a parenthesis, and jump down to the next line by hitting enter and add more in. You can add as much data as you want. My suggestion is don't try doing all of this at once, because if you make any mistake in the terminal command, it's going to error out and then you're going to have to redo it over and over again. What I would suggest doing is using an import statement for the data that you want to bring in, or there's stuff online, there's websites online where you can put the data into the website and it will create the statement automatically for you if you've got a lot of data you're trying to put in. In our case, this is very simple, so we're just going to hit enter, query OK, one row affected. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, one row was created. How do we see the data that's in our table? This is your first query, and this is going to be the one you use probably the most out of any query that you're going to ever use. This is the select command. So you're going to say select, and we're going to say star, which stands for all in pretty much all database languages. And we're going to say select all from, and then we're going to say user data. And what this is saying is everything that's in this table, I want you to go in there and print it out to the screen for me. So as you can see, everything that's in there, we've only got one row in there. The user ID, it created automatically. It put a 1 in there, which is good. First name, last name, username, and password is all good. If we add something else into this, so let's just insert another thing of data in there into, and we're going to say user data, and we need to put first name. Oops, first name, last name, let's say Steve Smith, and we're going to say his username is just Steve Smith. And his password, once again, is 12345. And we'll say password at the end. Okay, so now we got an error. What did we get an error for? It says near values. Okay, so we typed in values and then I accidentally put an E on the end. So now we have to write this over. Quick tidbit, if you push the up arrow on your keyboard, it will actually bring up the last command that you typed in. So I'm going to go over here. We're going to clear that out. Then we're going to hit enter again. Query OK, one row affected. So let's type in select all from user data again. So now you can see we have two pieces of data in the table, and the user ID is incrementing just fine, 1 and 2. Steve Smith, and then the password. So as you can see, as you need to put more information in here, this is how you enter it in. Now, the easiest way to do this is if you're building out let's say you're building out a program that is going to have a login for it. Well, obviously you'd build a database, you'd build a database for that to store all that data in. You'd build a table of like new users or user data like this. And basically what you do is when people would go to sign up for the first time, they'd enter in all this information and it would add it into the database automatically, and you wouldn't have to go through and add this stuff in. There's a lot of times at work that we've built out systems like that. There's other times at work that, we were entering in 3 million lines of data into a database. It just depends on what you're trying to build out and what you're trying to do with all this. So I hope this was helpful. In the next video, we're going to start going over select a little more. We're going to get into getting information out of a database and trying to quantify that data using the where clause and the distinct clause and the and the or and the not and order by and things like that. So we're going to start using these kind of keywords in MySQL to start grabbing information that we really need out of the database. I hope this was helpful. If you like the videos, please subscribe. Hit that notification bell. That way you never miss a new video when I upload it. And I will see you in the next one.